Yeah, thank you for letting me come here and speak to you today. I wanted to talk a little bit about the report of thorough examination. I'm aware that this is the graveyard shift, and you've put an insurance guy on here, so I'm quite aware of that. But yeah, the thorough examination, for those of you who don't know, is it's listed in LOLA, which is the Lifting Operations, Lifting Equipment Regulations, as a systematic and detailed examination of a lift or lifting equipment to establish any imminent risks or any imminent defects which are affecting the safety of the lift. And I was asked at work to look at the thorough examination report and see if there was any added value to it apart from its legal requirement. I was then asked by one of the major maintenance companies to have a look at some of the reports that they'd had in their, from their portfolio of maintenance, because there was a massive misunderstanding of the report from the maintainers and also from the authors of those reports. We found that the report was not strictly in line with LOLA. It was more of a condition report, and there was a lot of conflict between maintainers and the insurance companies or the inspection bodies. Sorry. When I was looking at what added value there might be, I noticed that the HSE had issued a document, Indg 339, which gave lift owners an explanation and guidance on the thorough examination. And it did say in there that you may use your examination report as a way to manage your maintenance. So in order to do that, I thought, well, you need to look at the report, you need to understand the report. And so looking at that, where do we go from there? So I looked to investigate the report, see if it could be used in that way, what information could be gained, and what problems might be encountered. So we look at a lift, and basically a lift is quite a safe means of transport. Statistically, it's said to be very safe. The reasons for that, this is not exhaustive, but generally it's got restricted and unimpeded travel. I know that's not quite true after what we've been seeing this morning with multiple cars in shafts and things like that. But generally it's unimpeded in its travel. It's regulated quite well with its placing on the market, its construction, etc. And the installation is quite well controlled. But there's also the aftercare, and this is where maintenance, examination, and sort of user checks come into play. Because the aftercare of the lift is the only part that the owner is actually got any influence on. So why do we do maintenance on the lift? Why should we maintain our lift? Well, there's a legal responsibility under the Health and Safety at Work Act. We need to ensure that any equipment that we provide, whether it be at work or not, in the case of lifts in blocks of flats, etc., you have to provide the equipment to be safe and not to cause harm. PURE, Regulation 5 of PURE, the Provision and Use of Work Equipment Regulations, states that you must maintain the equipment. So it's a legal responsibility. There's also a moral responsibility. In any ethical society, really, we should be trying not to cause anyone any harm. That's just how we should be acting. And there's also financial responsibility. There's less downtime, longevity of the equipment. So how can we ensure our maintenance? We can ensure a robust contract, so you need to go through your maintenance contract and make sure it actually provides what you want it to provide. And if you put maintenance in place, you basically put a system in place You need to monitor it, as you do with any system, to make sure that it continues to provide what you're expecting it to provide and that it is actually doing that. And Indg 339 by the HSE says that we can use the examination report to do that. As I said, in the UK it's a legal requirement to have your lift examined. So it would make sense that if you've got someone going along there every 6 months from a legal point of view, you could use that person or that report to look at the maintenance. However, you'd have to understand the report. And when I looked at it, a lot of reports come from SAFED companies, the Safety Assessment Federation, and they generally conform to the same sort of design. But there's other companies out there that have got their own reports, and they don't all look the same, they don't all contain the same information. So the thorough examination report itself is a result of Regulation 9 of LOLA, which says that you must carry out a thorough examination of lifting equipment every 6 months or under an examination scheme. And you're identifying defects which could become a danger to persons. Within those regulations, Regulation 10 talks about the defects and the report itself. And it says that any defects that you do detect, you must report in a timely manner to the owner of the equipment. And Schedule 1 of the regulations lists what information you must put into that report. It basically a description of the equipment, where it is installed or where the examination took place, the name of the person who undertook the examination, the date it was undertook, the date by which the next examination must be completed. And Part 8 of Schedule 1 talks about defects. And it talks about 8A defects, which are before further use or time related. So they actually pose an imminent risk to persons. And it's been determined that an imminent risk to persons means that it is likely to fail within the next few operations of that machine. So they will be classed as before further use. You must repair these defects before further use. Part 8A also looks at time-related defects. So it's not a risk at the moment, but it is deteriorating, and it will become a risk within a short period of time. And bearing in mind the examination takes place every 6 months, the inspector has got to be sure that the defect isn't going to deteriorate to a point that it fails before he gets back there in the next 6 months. So he'll give a time-related defect. It's usually up to 3 months. Most of the reports that I looked at also had a Part B defect, Part 8B defects, which were as soon as reasonably practicable. So these don't pose a current risk, but they are subject to deterioration. And so most of the companies that issue these reports say they need to be repaired as soon as reasonably practicable. Now, reasonably practicable means that the cost of the repair should not be disproportionate to the risk it poses. So we're really looking at another time defect within a period before the next examination. But Part 8B is the area that seems to be misunderstood by a lot of people authoring these reports. And the defects listed in there don't pose a risk to persons, and they often include a lot of maintenance issues. These should really be in Part 8C, which is the observation section of the report. The observation section is not a requirement under LOLA. So there's no requirement under LOLA to list these defects or these issues, but most companies seem to do that. And this is where I've found that conflict comes between the examination bodies, the inspection bodies, and the maintainers. Maintainers often take on the contracts for maintenance, and in their contract it's written that you will repair all Lola defects. So people are pricing up the contract, and then they're finding 8B defects there which are not Lola defects. But the client probably doesn't understand that, and they're saying, why haven't you done these defects? Well, they're not Lola defects, and then there's a conflict between the maintainer, the owner, and the inspection body. And it's not uncommon for me to have to try and defend Zurich as a company, and it's difficult to do that sometimes. So Part 8C is really where these defects or issues should go. So looking at that, there was a need for communication between all parties, and also a little bit of education. The duty holders or the owners of the lift, it was found that they didn't really understand the thorough examination report. They just wanted a piece of paper that told them that they were legally covered. And so they weren't really attending to defects, etc. The inspection bodies, they need to ensure that their reports comply with Lola, and also that the defects, etc., are put in the correct areas to give a bit of uniformity across the board and reduce confusion, conflict, etc. And the maintainers really needed to ensure that they got sight of the report. It's quite often that they never see the report of thorough examination. Ooh, wrong way. So what can we actually gain from a thorough examination report in order to monitor the maintenance? Well, in isolation, you're only really going to see defects or issues. So you may see a maintenance issue, but when did it occur? We don't know. So you sort of need some other information with that. So we're looking at log cards, maintenance schedules from the client, etc. And when you put that all together, you can see where issues were present at the last maintenance visit, and whether the issues formed part of the last maintenance visit. So we were finding that the log card stated that a maintainer was there sort of 2-3 weeks ago, but that issue was reported prior to that, and it's still being reported now. And if you've got the past inspection history, you can look and see how long those issues have actually been on the report. But you do also need to know whether or not the defects are maintenance issues or they're defects. So you need a little bit of education if you're not a maintainer or versed in the lift industry, to understand what is a defect, what's a maintenance issue, etc. So when we conducted the study, I looked at 400 surveyors, and I sent them out a form, a questionnaire, and asked them to, at the next 3 lifts that they inspected, to send me a copy of the thorough examination report and also a completed questionnaire. This gave a little bit of randomness to the survey, so they weren't picking the lifts that they were going to do this survey on. It was just the next 3 that they looked at. I looked then at taking all the 8B defects away from the report and extracting the maintenance issues, and then cross-reference them with information from the questionnaire. I got 159 returns from the 400 that I sent out. It was completely voluntary. They didn't have to do it, so that was probably more than I expected, to be fair. From those, I got 461 8B defects, of which 207 were classed as maintenance issues. And to be classed as a maintenance issue, we had to look at what is maintenance? So from BS 7255, we looked at, or I looked at, what was the definition of maintenance. And from there it said cleaning, lubrications, minor adjustments and small repairs. So from all of those defects, anything that fell into those categories, I extracted as a maintenance issue. And it sort of fell into basically 10 headings. So it was lubrication, lighting, loose fixings, you can see for yourself. The figures in blue were the actual maintenance issues that came off the report. And the figures in red were those which had had a maintenance issue within, a maintenance visit within the last 2 or 3 weeks. So you can just see there that there was lubrication issues prior to the visit, and after the visit there was still 9 lubrication issues, whatever those lubrication issues were. The other thing that was quite startling was the fact that the user interface on the lift, so the lighting, for example, the doors, the alarm system, all generated quite high figures, which didn't really sit well. So what were the report issues? Well, the issues on the report were that a lot of the defects were incorrectly categorised. They're not necessarily the fault of the author. I know we get a lot of people phoning up saying, your surveyor's done this and your surveyor's done that. They actually quite often are limited in the way they can report these defects because the company requires them to report in a particular way. So it's not always the surveyor's fault. There were poorly worded issues and defects which caused confusion and conflict with owners and maintainers. When I was talking to the major manufacturer or maintainer, we looked at a lot of reports from different manufacturers, and there was a lot of confusion with the defects. You could have a defect written 3 or 4 different ways, and the way it was written, it meant different things. So the insurance or the inspection industry need to be more aware of that. There was inconsistencies in categorization of issues and defects between different inspection bodies and within the same body. So what other data did I collect? We looked at the lift type, whether it was traction, hydraulic or a platform lift. The age, was it pre or post the lift regulations? The environment, commercial, retail, residential, type of maintenance contract, etc. The number of visits that contract had per year. And this information was all gathered via the questionnaires that were sent out with the surveyor. Some of the conclusions that came from the study were the communication between the owner, the maintainer and the inspection body was inherently really poor, and that really does need to improve. The environment, so whether the lift was in a hospital or in a block of flats, and the type of lift and the number of maintenance visits seemed to have little effect on the perception of the standard of the maintenance. And in effect, 60% of the reports that came back actually were good, were classed as good, which meant that 40% were either poor or average. So that's not too bad. The age also seemed to have little effect on the findings concerning maintenance, which I thought was quite startling. But then I looked at it a little bit more and thought, well, actually, I'm only taking out maintenance issues here. The rest of those 400 and odd issues were actually defects. And when I looked at those, there was a lot more on older lifts than there was on the newer lifts. So, that sort of made sense a little bit more then. And on-site documentation was inherently poor. I've given David a little bit of a mention here because he'd put something in an Elevation magazine about the meaningless tick. which is prevalent all over the place when we're looking at log cards. It just says service carried out, service A carried out. Doesn't tell you what service A involves, so you know it's very difficult to see what's actually being done. And the examination reports seem to differ from inspection body and from surveyor to surveyor, so there's definitely more standardisation needs to be done. And I'm actually doing some work now on the categorisation of defects, what defects are being reported, to try and stop this confusion. And that's a very, very brief synopsis of the study. So thank you for listening.